Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Lakewood City Council study session on May 20th, 2019 at 7 p.m. in chambers. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Hall.
Here.
Roybal.
Here.
Gutwein. Here. Skilling. LeBure. Abel.
Here.
Vincent.
Here.
Vita. Johnson.
Here.
Franks.
Here.
Harrison. Do you have a quorum?
Great. Thank you. Well, good evening. Thank you all for joining us. We have a couple of quick updates on the agenda for this evening, and we will get that kicked off with an update from our partners at Xcel Energy on Colorado's energy plan. And I'd like to introduce Mr. Preston Gibson, Area Manager, Friendly Face, and Community and Local Government Affairs Representative. Come on down. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mayor and City Council. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, I was just thinking as I was sitting there, I think the last time I was here was maybe 2 to 3 years ago. I was talking about our energy future at the time. And a lot of the stuff that we talked about back then in terms of new technology and renewables and so on is something that we've already implemented. And we're trying to move the ball even further now with our Colorado energy plan and a recent announcement to be 100% carbon free. So I appreciate your time this evening, and I do have a PowerPoint presentation. I appreciate that's on the screen right now. I'll go through the slides, and this is meant to be a conversation. I'm not trying to make it a big presentation, but at any rate, so ask any questions along the way. And do I change the slides here or just with this? Okay, good deal. Okay, just quickly about Xcel Energy. I think you probably know that we're the largest gas and electric utility here in Colorado. We have about 1.4 or 1.5 million gas customers and electric customers, and we serve 8 states. We operate as public service company still, but we are under the Xcel Energy moniker, and we serve in 8 states. We're based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so we serve Minnesota as well, parts of Minnesota, parts of Wisconsin, North Dakota, South Dakota, a little bit of Michigan, Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas. So just a little bit about our priorities. I'll probably spend more time tonight on leading the clean energy transition than the other 2 topics, but we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing to, as we call it, enhance the customer experience and also keep bills low. And that's something that has been a top priority for us for a long time. But more recently, we're talking about job 1 is reducing carbon, protecting cost and reliability, and advancing technology. Now, years ago, most utilities, including Xcel Energy, were talking really only about reliability and cost because we hadn't gotten into renewables that made it even anywhere near affordable to actually to put those on the system. But based on the more recent affordability of renewables as well as demands from our customers, we have moved more and more in the trend towards adding renewables to our system. So we in December announced that we are planning to be 80% carbon free by 2030. It's a pretty amazing achievement when you look back to just around 2005, and I think we were 4 or 5% renewable, and we maybe had a little bit of efficiency. And you know, this is really important to our customers. It's really important to our communities. Whether you believe in climate change or our impact on climate change, I think as a company, we think the right thing to do is produce cleaner air. And that's in fact what we're doing. We're trying to produce cleaner air for our region. And over the last, just as I've worked for the company, I started working for the company in 2010, late 2010. We've gotten the coal out of the region. We don't have coal producing electricity at our north facility, North Denver, which is called Cherokee. We've closed coal-fired units. We've refueled with natural gas, which are much cleaner. And we've also added more renewables to our system. But at any rate, we're planning to be 80% renewable by 2030. 80% carbon reduction and 100% carbon free by 2050. We'll need a little bit of help from technology to get to 100% carbon free by 2050. So just a little snapshot as to where we've come from here in Colorado. In 2005, we're looking only at about 4% renewables on our system. Probably a lot of that was from wind source. We implemented that in the mid-1990s. It was one of the first large renewable energy subscription programs in the entire country. And this was right about the time we were just getting ready. 2006, I think, is when we implemented the Solar Rewards solar program for distributed, solar panels on rooftops. But back then, we were at 65% generation by coal. And again, we weren't really that concerned at that point. Our customers weren't that concerned until about that time frame when they voted on an initiative to require us to be 10% renewable. Subsequently, that was moved to 30% by the legislature, and we're very close to being there. Right now, we're a little better than the graphic that shows 2017, but you can see the reduction in coal, also a reduction in natural gas. By 2027, we estimate that we'll be about 57% renewable. And then if you start looking at the contribution towards energy efficiency, our demand side management, energy efficiency, our rebate programs and so on, I think we'll probably be between 60 and 65% carbon reduction by 2027. And again, we are planning to hit 80% by 2030. This is just another way to look at just another graphic representation. I think one thing that's I like to see on here is instructive is we're moving from 46% coal to 23% coal generation. And this is a part of our Colorado Energy Plan. And as part of that plan, what we're doing is we're going to be adding another 700 megawatts of solar, which is very significant, 1,100 megawatts of wind, and we're also adding 275 megawatts of battery storage. We've been talking about battery storage, battery backup forever because, as we commonly say, the wind doesn't always blow and the sun obviously doesn't always shine. So you got to have a way to back that up. And so batteries are becoming more feasible now than they've ever been in the past. We need greater battery technology so we have longer term storage, but for daily imbalances in our load, it can help even out and provide electricity when the demand is high. And so we expect that they're going to work fairly well for us, and we're adding, again, a large amount. In fact, when we announced 275 megawatts last year, it was the largest amount of battery storage that was even currently under construction by all the utilities in the country as far as we were able to ascertain. So it's a very significant amount. We're also, by the way, going to be using natural gas to back up the renewables in addition to batteries when it's needed. So when we announced the program to be 100% carbon free by 2050, we did get a lot of press on that, a lot of attention on it. You can see some of the things that we've done. Now, this slide here is not just for Colorado, but it's really for our company as a whole. But you can see some of the things that we've accomplished so far. 25% coal fleet retired early, reduced customer bills over the past 5 years. In fact, our customer bills have gone down about 10% over the last 5 years. But we need to encourage new technologies to be able to get to carbon-free by 2050. I want to say a few things probably. There are a lot of different goals. Everybody seems to have their ideas. They're all different, though. 100% renewable by 2050, 100% carbon-free by 2050. 25% reduction, 12% by. You can see they're all over the map. These are for the states that we serve. And I want to also point out that this is for the generation of electricity. This is not for our natural gas customers. Again, we still have about close to 1.5 million natural gas customers here in Colorado. So this is irrespective. This is different. We're just talking about generation of electricity. So what we have done is we've completed a study by, you can see the citation there, Dr. Brian O'Neill, University of Denver. He is a climate change modeler, and he took the inputs that we gave him that are going to get us to 80% carbon free and then hopefully to 100% carbon free by 2050. And it shows that we are meeting the targets of the Paris Climate Agreement. And in fact, we likely will be able to limit it not only to 2 degrees, but 1.5 degrees, which is even better. So when our CEO came out from Minneapolis last year in December and made the announcement at the Nature and History Museum, and we got an amazing amount of national press. We had 60 million social media hits, if you can believe that, 60 million social media hits, because we were the largest utility in the country to make this announcement to be 100% carbon free. And then a lot of the media obviously picked up on it. So how do we plan to get there? Invest in wind and solar under our Steel for Fuel growth strategy. We call it Steel for Fuel because the traditional way of generating electricity is with fuel. It's with coal or it's with natural gas. We're using wind or steel because we have steel towers. One of the programs that one of the projects I like to mention, I'll take just a sidetrack for a second, is our Rush Creek Wind project out on the Eastern Plains. And I think we were getting ready to construct that last time we were here. And it's one of those projects where I think everybody wins. You're always sort of looking for that sort of win-win so people don't lose. And I think that this is really a good example of that because we bought all the parts, the pieces and the parts here in Colorado from Vestas. The towers are made in Pueblo, and the blades are made in Windsor, and the nacelles are made up in Brighton. And so we deployed them out on the Eastern Plains, so the farmers are getting then the benefit of royalties and so on from the windmills being on their farms, and it obviously helps them to continue farming in some cases when they're farming on a shoestring. In addition, we're paying taxes here in Colorado. It was a $1 billion investment. We're continue to pay property taxes, and it provides obviously clean energy. And at the time, it was the lowest cost energy on our system, the lowest cost generation of energy on our system. So it's one of those really good stories that I like to talk about, and it's the kind of stories that makes our company, feel good about what we're doing. Number two, helping customers manage their energy usage and bills through efficiency and rebate programs. We have many rebate programs. Carbon-free nuclear, that's upper Midwest. We don't have any carbon-free nuclear here. There isn't any nuclear in Colorado. Don't know if there ever will be, but that's in the upper Midwest. We've had them for a long time. We'd like to continue to maintain them. Transforming the energy grid by retiring or reducing the operation of aging coal plants and replacing them with their energy with flexible natural gas, renewables, and advanced technologies. And where we haven't retired all of our coal plants, if you look over in Craig and Hayden and a couple of places, we put more high-tech scrubbers, to clean the air that comes, the emissions when it comes out of those plants. So we still do have coal, obviously, on our system. We'll have coal on our system for a while, but we've done what we can to actually, clean that up as much as possible. Our aspiration is to be carbon-free by 2050. We'll need new dispatchable technologies to be able to get us there. Batteries are not going to do it yet, and I've got a little more on that later. So this is the real challenge. Once you get about over 60% renewables, the costs continue to go up, and they go up higher and higher as you get closer and closer to 100% renewable. You notice we're talking about 100% carbon-free. And again, when you get closer and closer to 100% carbon-free or 100% renewables, the costs do get very, very expensive. And studies have shown that you have to overbuild the grid by potentially as many as 8 times to be completely renewable. So when we have cities and customers that want to be completely renewable, it's very difficult to get there in a cost-effective way, because you can imagine overbuilding 8 times the system and all the transmission lines to get you there. But to be 24/7 carbon-free, we'll need to look at other technologies like carbon capture and storage, power to gas, creating hydrogen gas and then storing hydrogen gas for usage, and maybe advanced nuclear, many other things that we hope to be able to take advantage of as we get close to 2050. Our Colorado Energy Plan, I mentioned earlier, where we are currently implementing our Colorado Energy Plan from now through 2026, which will take us to 55% renewable. You can see where we're putting the resources. Some of them have a little battery next to them, the sort of dome-looking thing. Obviously, it's not really a dome, it's really solar panels at an angle with the sun over it. Those are solar panels. That shows where we're putting the resources. And then you see the wind turbines. These aren't all owned by Xcel Energy. A lot of this is through power purchase agreements. So we actually purchase the power from others who are generating the electricity. But this is a good graphic representation of where it's going to be placed. Customer-focused energy solutions, in addition to what we're doing as a utility, we have a number of programs that are available for our customers that want to move a little faster. And Solar Rewards Community, that's our Solar Gardens program. Renewable Connect, which is a program that we offered last year. We're probably going to have more Renewable Connect available in the next year or so. And then WindSource, which has been around for a long time. This is just a little matrix that shows our renewable choice programs, and I don't want to really go over all the minutiae on all that. Advanced grid intelligence and security. This is going to create the opportunity for us to provide additional programs and for our customers to be able to monitor how they're using their energy. We are in the process, just beginning the process of rolling out an advanced metering system, and we'll deploy some of those meters towards the end of this year, and it's going to be about a 5-year rollout. And eventually, you will be able to see how you're using your energy every minute of the day, and you will then be able to take advantage of programs that we'll have where we may charge a little bit. In fact, currently we have a pilot program that you could take advantage of called time of use, where if you can cut back your time of use when it's our peak demand times in the late afternoon, just as an example, then you'll likely save energy on your energy bill. And then you run your appliances that take a lot of electricity in the evening, the off-peak hours. And the reason that saves electricity is because the more and more resources we have to put on the system to generate the electricity, the more expensive it is to generate that electricity. So these are the kind of programs that we're going to have available. With this program, the Advanced Grid Intelligence and Security, it's going to be connected to what we call our field area network. And you may have seen, I don't know if you've seen a program where we've actually have to build some fairly tall towers in our substations to wirelessly connect to these meters. And then when we have that all deployed, if you have an outage at your home, you will be able to know it immediately, and we'll be able to respond immediately. Right now, if you have an outage at your home, we want you to call in. We know where the large outages are, but we may not know where an outage is that affects your individual home. But we'll be able to know that and be able to respond more quickly. We'll be able to add renewables more seamlessly. You know, our system was built for one-way electrical transmission. We generate it, we send it to you. Now you're sending it back to us, right? So this will enable us to more seamlessly integrate those renewables as well. Energy storage, as I mentioned, we have 275 megawatts that we're going to deploy. It's something that helps balance out the energy demand throughout a day. But when you have a bomb cyclone hit and you don't have any, you don't have any solar energy, maybe you got some wind in certain places, or you just have a few days like we've got this week. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? You got to have more than just battery storage. You have longer term batteries that store it for a longer period of time. We do have an enormous amount of energy efficiency programs, demand side management, rebates, audits, analyses, and so on and so forth as a company. Probably the next place that makes most sense for us to head is what we call strategic electrification, electrifying the transport industry. That's where the majority of carbon is being generated today. That's our greatest opportunity. As you probably know, the governor wants us to move forward quickly on that. But as a company, we do want to move forward on that. And we just had some legislation adopted in this session that allows us to get involved in creating that infrastructure, those charging stations, and then being able to work with the Public Utilities Commission on rates for that so we can get there a little more quickly. In terms of affordable clean energy, our bills have gone down over the past 5 or so years. In Colorado, we're about 35%, again, talking about electricity, about 35% below the national average. Again, a very important thing. So as we continue to add renewables to our system, we want to be sure that it's done the right way so we don't increase customer bills. So with that, I appreciate your time this evening. Thank you for that, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Preston. Much appreciated. It's a nice presentation. I just also want to echo to whether it's the council members up here or the community, you're always willing to meet and reach out, and if there's an issue, you've been very responsive, so I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. And I do want to say that's something that we try to do quickly. And also want to give a shout out to Jonathan Wachtel and Lynn Coppage. Our Energy Future Collaboration Partnership is going very well. We've done a lot of analyses, and we've still got a ways to go to get to complete our memorandum of understanding and our work plan for this year. But we're certainly making progress, and I just wanted to thank them for all their work. And we're actually meeting again this week. So
Great. So there's a few questions. Mr. Skilling.
I think it was on slide 10. You had the municipalities that were listed. I think Inglewood was at 12%, Boulder at 80%, Lakewood at 50%. What do those numbers mean? It was on your slide. So is there something that Boulder's doing that Inglewood's not doing and that Lakewood could do more of? What was that slide about?
one of the things that slide is about goals that those cities set, irrespective of working with Xcel Energy. These are goals that those cities set. Similarly, like you set goals in your sustainability plan. I think 45% for municipal facilities was in the sustainability plan. So those are goals that were set individually by those cities, by those municipalities or communities. What are they doing to get there? We'll be working with them to help them, just like we are here, to help you achieve your goals. For example, we know that you want to eventually, we think you want to eventually look at being 100% carbon free or maybe 100% renewable. How do we get you there from what's on our grid today and where we're planning to go on our grid, and how fast do you want to get there? I think that's what that's showing. In fact, I know that's what that's showing, is what those communities, what their goals are, not our goals, but what their goals are.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Mr. Roybal?
Mayor. Preston, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I just wanted to see if you had any insight of the new technologies coming. For example, we started with the incandescent bulb, the light bulb. We went to fluorescent bulbs, and now we went to LED bulbs, which use a lot less energy. Do you foresee us using some new technologies that'll help not use too much energy, and that'll help us cut down on the usage of electricity, especially like on commercial buildings?
Well, one thing I can tell you is that we do have pilot programs to try to look at ways to reduce electricity usage, such as the microgrid program that we have out at Peña Station on the way to the airport with Panasonic Enterprise Solutions, where it's a microgrid. There's solar panels, there's batteries. It can operate independently for a period of time, and so on and so forth. In terms of future technologies, one of the things that we are looking at is I know that nuclear energy has been controversial over the years, but can that be made more safely? Can it be made more safely that enables us to be able to deploy that resource for producing energy? The carbon capture and storage and the power, in creating hydrogen gas, and that can then be used when the sun doesn't shine, the wind doesn't blow. There's a lot of technologies. We as a company are going to continue to participate to the extent that we can, but we're also going to rely on companies that are really focused on R&D to help us get there. And maybe, obviously public policy makes a lot of difference too. If there's public policy to support that research and development, which I've got to believe probably will be there, then I think we're going to get to 100% carbon free. But we're not betting on any one strategy or any one technology, because when you get out to, what is that? It's 30 years. What happened? Look what we were like 30 years ago. I don't know. We really don't know.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to see you, Preston, and I appreciate your genuine and honest delivery of information to us. And I'd like to echo what Adam said. You've always been so good to work with whenever there's been a constituent issue. Thank you. You are good at that.
Thank you.
One thing I have really learned with this, it's very complicated, all of this. And you are doing some very creative ways to try and help your consumers and try and figure out how we can do things cleaner, which is really important, and just cheaper in general. Tim Jackson came to one of our ward meetings, and electric cars aren't selling that good. So one of the things that some of the dealers are doing is upping the amount for the gasoline cars in order to lower the amount for the electric cars to incentivize them. But the reality is that's going to also impact the grid. And, you know, one thing kind of, it's like a bowl of spaghetti. You pull on one and you create something else down the road. Thank you.
It's interesting. I hadn't heard that, though. That's interesting.
Mr. Abel?
Thanks, Preston. Xcel is a great community member as well, and I especially like the fact that the price of electricity is falling, less out of my pocket. It seems to me that, and maybe it's already advanced past it, but street lights take up, must use a lot of electricity. Is Xcel converting to a more a greener source of lighting?
Well, let me just go back and say that about 3 years ago we started our LED street lighting program, and the majority of cities in our service territory in Colorado have gone with LED lighting, and we have a program that we can actually convert your existing high-pressure sodium lights to LED lights. And it's not all of them. It's the ones on the Cobra heads, you know, the poles that go up like that, just the standard street lights. And we're now starting to have more decorative street light offerings just now. But we can do that no charge to the city. We can convert those, no charge to the city, and your bills will go down. Some cities, I like to say most cities or majority of cities in this area have. Denver just recently signed on to the program, so we're currently in Denver converting their lights. So we do have that program available, and I will say this though: there's one city in Colorado, one town in Colorado, that still has mercury vapor lights, and I'm not going to say which town, but we don't supply them. But as we start talking about technologies, I remember when I was a kid, all those really bluish mercury vapor lights that are not energy efficient. And this town particularly just likes that, the ambiance, if you will. But we've gone from that to high pressure sodium now to LEDs. And when that high pressure sodium came around, everybody said, oh, it's just too yellow of a light. We just don't like that because we're used to mercury vapor. But the LEDs are a very clean white light. And not only are they typically, they're better for color renditions at night. They're better for security, crime, police departments love the lights because it does cut down on crime and provides, again, better color rendition. But every city has to make their own decision as to what they want to do and why they want to do it. And we respect whatever decision the city of Lakewood makes on that. But they are available, the LED lighting.
Thank you. Sounds like a conversation we might have soon.
Ms. Gutwein?
Thank you. I just wanted to also thank you for your continued partnership in helping us reach our clean energy goals.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Okay, and I would just echo, our staff does work and is continuing to work, whether it's streetlights or the other things that are of importance with Xcel. So our staff is and has been monitoring the streetlights and looking at different options over the years, and they're continue to be engaged. So, Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. Just one more thing. Preston, in the 60s, Public Service built Cabin Creek Reservoir to store energy at night. How's that working? How's that going? I'm assuming it's still there.
It works very well, and just a quick word on that. Before I ever started working for Xcel Energy, you drive up Guanella Pass and you see that, obviously, hydroelectric facility, and I always wondered, where's the river? How are we producing hydroelectric? We don't have the Columbia River here. It's like, what is this all about? And I never really understood it until I started working for the company. So we've got the Lower Cabin Creek Reservoir and Upper Cabin Creek Reservoir. And what we do is we pump up the water at night, okay? We pump it up a hill to the upper reservoir. And then when we have high demand for electricity, when on a hot day or it's just late in the afternoon, we let that water flow down through the pipe and generate electricity with hydro. And it's a pretty interesting system. It's been around since about 1960. You might be interested to know that we're spending about $80 to $100 million right now upgrading, refurbishing, and upgrading that system and creating even a little bit greater storage capacity, and it's going to produce about 10% more electricity. So it works great, and we're still going to keep it operating for many, many years in the future.
Well, good deal. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming out, and we look forward to continuing to work with you, whether it's Jonathan or Jay or Ben, on things moving forward.
Thank you very much for your time tonight.
All right, thank you. So we have public input at study sessions, which is a little bit different than public comment. Public input is your opportunity to ask questions about the presentation or give feedback based upon what we're discussing here in front of us tonight. So you'll have 3 minutes, 2.5. This little thing here will be green. At 2.5 plus, it'll go yellow. And then at 3 minutes, your time will be up. And we have one person who's signed up, and that's Loren. You're up to speak on this portion. Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Lauren Mayon. You know me for a little bit of advocacy work in Lakewood, but my main involvement in energy policy has been for 13 years at the state capitol. And I want to give you some other facts that Mr. Preston did not present, and I hope you might stay 3 minutes and hear these. So Xcel has invested $1.5 billion into coal plants in this century in Colorado, including the latest big coal plant in Pueblo, which will be amortized through ratepayer payments through year 2071. Xcel, in the last ERP, has committed Coloradans to 380 megawatts of gas plants, which will be powered mostly by fracked gas. And it's done so in negotiations at the PUC through its large staff of attorneys, committing Coloradans to fracked gas for electricity for decades. Xcel starves the community solar garden programs in Colorado by awarding a tiny fraction of the files presented to the PUC, despite the tremendous amount of work put in by various communities to apply for these solar gardens. Xcel is starving distributed solar at every opportunity. It is fighting hard right now against net metering, which enables homeowners to get full value for their solar generation. And that is just one facet of it. I don't have enough time to develop. Xcel is disabling clean heating in Colorado at every turn and has been for 13 years straight. This year we finally had language. The language was "and clean heating planning" in a bill that reforms the Public Utility Commission under Governor Polis's leadership this year. It passed through the House. It passed through it passed fully through the Senate. It passed through most General Assembly and committee hearings in the House, and at the last second, Xcel's lobbyist succeeded in removing clean heating and heating planning from the scope of the bill behind closed doors at the last hour, with no democracy involved in this process except the overwhelming political power of their lobbyists. So I'm glad that Xcel is making good changes with its right hand. It is very good to see. But know that these changes have been forced by 13 years of active community and political engagement in Colorado. They were not volunteered by Xcel. Xcel did everything it could to prevent that. At this point, it has come to realize that continuing that stance would simply turn its customers into its competitors, and it's good to see Xcel doing good things on the electric side. But at the same time, the left hand is trying to kill the competition that led Xcel to those good changes, and it is it is disenabling clean heating in Colorado. So I urge you to be careful in your
Time's up.
comments towards
Thank you.
Xcel. Thank you.
And it's always challenging. This is an opportunity for you to be a part of kind of the presentation at study session. So I think a comment like that would be better suited for regular public comment at our regular meetings. But I appreciate you taking the time. And there's just a little bit of a difference between public input and the public comment process. Thank you. Anybody else on the presentation? Charlie? To the presentation, please.
Thank you. I like Xcel. Their stock price has doubled, and I have some. I've got 24 solar panels on my house, so last month I had a $50 gas bill and a $40 check, so it cost me $10. But one graph kind of irritated me, and he said, your bills are going down. Well, it cost me $18,000 to make my bill go down. So a lot of us are investing in solar to reduce our bills, but it goes, my $18,000 went to help out Xcel.
Anybody else? All right. Thank you very much. And I would recommend both of you, if you have any further questions, you see well, it's not on here anymore, but we can certainly get you in touch with Mr. Gibson. Lorena, I'm sure you know how to reach Preston as well. So, but if you do have further questions, please let us know and we will connect you with Xcel. Another opportunity to further weigh in on this sort of thing would be when we have a sustainability update, I think in July as well, when we review kind of our goals as to where we're headed with our sustainability plan. All right, item 4.
Item 4, discussion, development, dialogue, parking.
All right, Mr. Parker, you're gonna kick this off, and then we'll have public input. Again, please, if we can relate the information, comments and questions to the presentation, that'd be much appreciated. And then Mr. Skilling, do you want to kind of take it from there afterwards? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Travis Parker, Planning Director. So tonight we're here for the third set of zoning recommendations from the Development Dialogue. Like the others, this has been through a number of meetings at the Planning Commission, open houses, study sessions, public hearings, and been through the committee as well. We have, I think, 10 recommendations today that fall into 5 categories. We're going to be looking at multifamily parking, restaurant parking, electric vehicle requirements, bicycle parking requirements, and then some changes to parking for mini warehouse and storage. So I'll jump right in. Again, these recommendations have all been sent to you from the Planning Commission through the Development Dialogue Committee, and many of you sit on that committee and have reviewed these personally. The first recommendation has to do with the minimum parking requirement for multifamily residential. When the code was written in 2012, minimums were set based on transit limits. Minimums for all uses were set based on the lowest that council and staff thought would be necessary in any situation, while maximums were tiered based on the context, based on whether they're suburban, urban, or transit. In discussion with the Planning Commission, with the public, the thought was that we needed to tier those minimums as well. The minimum that might be appropriate for a transit zone is not necessarily appropriate in an urban or a suburban area. And so the Planning Commission has proposed that we raise the minimums in urban and suburban. In urban, the minimum parking requirement would go up to 1 space per 1,000 square feet, and in suburban would go up to 1.25 spaces per 1,000 square feet. There was a lot of discussion on these ratios in both the Planning Commission and the committee, and I know I've talked to Councilor Vincent tonight about maybe proposing further changes and maybe also proposing a change to the transit zone, and I'll let her introduce that discussion later tonight. Keep in mind, in addition to raising those changes or leaving them alone in the transit zone, the Planning Commission and Development Dialogue Committee did recommend additional parking requirements on top of those ratios. This would be a new requirement for visitor parking for multifamily projects. Currently, we just have a ratio for multifamily projects. They can assign those all to residents. They can split them between residents and visitors. Our new requirement would have a ratio of visitor-only parking on top of the 0.75, 1.0, or 1.25 that would be assignable to residents. The ratios sent up by the Planning Commission were 1 space per 10 units for suburban, 1 space per 15 units for urban, and 1 space per 30 for transit. The Dialogue Committee did recommend that the transit ratio be changed to 1 space per 20. Recommendation 3 has to do with restaurant parking. Again, just like with residential, in 2012, we set a minimum of 2 spaces per 1,000 for restaurants, and then set tiered maximums based on the context. The proposal from the Planning Commission and the Development Dialogue Committee is to also tier the minimums and have rising minimums as you get into more auto-oriented parts of the city. But in this case, even the transit would be raised. So currently, minimum in all areas of the city is 2 spaces per 1,000. The proposal is to raise that to 4 spaces, to double it in the transit, to triple it to 6 spaces per 1,000 in the urban, and to quadruple it to 8 spaces per 1,000 in the suburban context. Along with raising those ratios, we wanted, and the Planning Commission wanted, to acknowledge that there were certain uses and certain scenarios where parking is demonstrably less needed and less used. In terms of residential units, we did surveys of age-restricted properties and income-restricted properties and found that they used a much lower ratio of parking. So along with raising the parking limitations, the Planning Commission and Development Dialogue Committee recommended allowing some discretionary reductions. So a potential 20% reduction for age-restricted senior living housing, and a 20% reduction for income-restricted housing. In terms of restaurants, those bodies recommended a 20% reduction for the transit. For restaurants in the transit context, so within walking distance of light rail stations. If I would suggest that if the council looks at changing the ratios that we're requiring and maybe raising them, I would suggest relooking at these as well and maybe lowering these proportionally so that we can continue to have lower total requirements for age-restricted and income-restricted housing. Recommendation 5, modifying the surface parking limitations in the suburban context. Currently, in the suburban context, you are not allowed to have a standalone surface parking lot. So in a situation where we have a restaurant who wants to build a surface parking lot just across the street for their use, that's not allowed under the current code. Recommendation 5 would change that to allow standalone parking lots to be able to serve restaurants in those situations. Recommendation 6 is to create new standards for electric vehicles. This would apply to new buildings. We'd create not only requirements for design and for parking spaces, but create a requirement for EV spaces. You have a table in your in your information that shows what the requirements would be. Basically, it would be a 2 or 5% requirement for actual active electric vehicle charging spaces, and then up to 20% requirement for EV-ready spaces. And that basically just means when the parking structure is constructed, running conduit to those spaces so that they don't have to be retrofitted later. What we've discovered is that it's relatively inexpensive to build the infrastructure in for future EV spaces. It's a lot more expensive to come back and retrofit it later and dig out and put the conduit in after the fact in older buildings. Recommendation 7 is to update the standards for bicycle parking, both as short-term and long-term standards. For short-term, this would involve new standards for identification signs and standards for the location of that short-term parking. For long-term, it involves requiring shower facilities on buildings above a certain size and some area requirements for that parking. Recommendations 8 through 10 have to do with both bicycle and auto parking for mini warehouse and storage. What we have found over the past few years is that our parking requirements overestimated both the auto and bicycle parking needs of these facilities. These are facilities where people come in and load and unload materials in a car or a truck and then leave. There's not a lot of long-term or even short-term auto parking, and there's even less need for bicycle parking at these facilities. And then finally, recommendation 11, I don't think there's any action to be, in fact, I think the action's already been taken on this. The Development Dialogue Committee added a recommendation that council examine options for addressing on-street parking problems in the neighborhoods. One of the main discussion points at the Development Dialogue was no matter how much parking we require on site, no matter how we set the regulations on site, people are going to park where it's convenient. And if it's convenient for them to park on the street in front of the building, they will, or in the street, on the next block, they will. And really, there needs to be two ways of looking at this. We're looking at the parking requirements on site, but also looking at managing the parking on the street. And I think council took a first step at that last week with ordering a parking management plan for the city that can later be turned into some actionable items for on-street regulation. So I don't believe there's any action necessary on this last recommendation 11, and unless we hear otherwise, this one will go away when we come to a hearing with actual zoning update changes. And with that, I will sit down and be happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, so we'll start the public input portion, and Laura, you're up first. Good evening.
First of all, we're grateful this is finally here. We've appreciated the work of the Development Dialogue Committee. We thought parking would never get addressed by the council. I have been spending a lot of hours reading 50 years worth of zoning ordinances and city code. And while that may sound like it's a very unfun task, once you start getting into it, it's quite enlightening. So more than 40 years, the City of Lakewood and City of Lakewood councils have supported maintaining, preserving, protecting the integrity and character of stable neighborhoods, because neighborhoods are the backbone of this city. Parking in the last 7 years, since 2012, as you saw in a great presentation last week, is undermining the backbone of a lot of that in many areas of the city. So it seems to me that when it is convenient for a developer, when it's for a decision for a developer, we use verbiage, integrity and character of neighborhoods. But when it's actually for neighbors and neighborhoods, we seem to still be putting businesses first, especially out-of-state developers. And I'm asking you to please, in these parking, requirements. Put your neighborhoods first. So you're all aware we're unhappy with the stack 'em and rack 'em development that we've been having in the last 7 years in this city. The problem is twofold in the city code with parking. The code is explicit that developers are allowed to use adjacent streets for parking. They are allowed that, and all that language is still in here. On the section in your packet tonight for visitor parking, at the discretion of the director, visitor parking can be on adjacent streets. So as long as you are allowing the adjacent streets to fulfill a developer's parking requirements, we're going to keep having this problem, and we're not going to solve the problem. The other issue is basically, as I keep bringing this point, we keep seeing too much discretionary power to the director. And I'm starting to have absolutely no confidence in that discretionary power. There's no rhyme or reason for, say, in this section of the code, what is the criteria that the director will give discretion for that parking or not? So it needs to be a little bit more explicit, I think. With respect to residential, we were told in January that you guys would consider that the 7 spaces right now for residential, single-family residential, should actually be reduced maybe to like 5.
Time's up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olson, Ms. Brewer, Mr. Ash, Mr. West.
Okay, well, I haven't been reading codes back quite as far as you have, but December 8th, 1999, I was working with Gene Schwam on restricted street parking. So I've been doing this for 10 years. Just a few comments. Last week I presented a parking study for West Line Flats, and I came up with 1.4 parking spaces per unit. So it's and they're really in a transit zone because they're across the street there. So you really can't come up with a number of 1 or 1.25 or 1.5. There's got to be some flexibility. And I think the flexibility can be in residential parking permits. So the neighborhood has a chance to fight back. I have the 35-page study done in 2016-4, presented to City Council February of 2017, that outlines residential permit parking. And I would hope that this might be a basis for a document on implementing. And there you just take a problem, you don't do the whole city, you just take a problem area, define it, and then define the parking. Last week I complained about why they weren't enforcing the rules at West Line Flats. And I have the site plan, and there's nothing in there about letting people park wherever they want on the streets. So I'd like to see where the city has allowed parking almost anywhere with no enforcements at West Line Flats.
Thank you. And just to reiterate what Mr. Parker said, last week council did take the first step in a parking management plan, which would then be what would relate to what you're talking about with permit parking and other things along that line. So looking at it as a whole city and making recommendations.
Yeah, slide 11, I saw that.
Oh, thank you. Liz, come on down. Good evening. Hi.
Mayor, good evening, and council members too. Thank you. My name is Elizabeth Breuer, and I live in Lakewood Estates. It's obvious that the traffic has increased everywhere, including Lakewood, so that to me indicates that there are more vehicles and not less. In my experience, if people are using the light rail to head downtown or elsewhere, they most likely would drive to the light rail station, park their vehicle, and board their train. Again, use of a vehicle. This is not downtown, it's Lakewood, and unfortunately, we may experience issues that the neighborhoods surrounding downtown are experiences, but maybe it can be looked at now because there's a parking study group that you've established, and we're so thankful for that. Seriously appreciative that that's going forward. Thank you. It's often stated that millennials use public transit and not vehicles, and that is very true in some instances. They may use public transit, but they also have vehicles. I'm not as familiar with other areas, but some must be similar to ours within Lakewood. Because our neighborhood, we have quite a few millennials with young families who are not at the driving age. However, a very high number of those households not only have two vehicles for the parents, but also other vehicles, a truck, or a Jeep, a vehicle, or maybe a motorcycle. We're a residential single filing. We have some millennials without children who have 4 vehicles, maybe one in the garage, one on the driveway, and 2 on the street. And then we have families with young drivers who all have large vehicles, so that relates to quite a few per household. Sometimes those vehicles are parked pickup trucks, and sometimes they are stacked behind each other, in particular in cul-de-sacs. Certainly there are homes with 1 car, and those could be single people, people who desire 1 vehicle, or older couples who at this time in their lives have decided that 1 car would be sufficient. Although there are areas that have the transit capabilities, not all of Lakewood looks like that currently. Now, the weather tonight isn't conducive, but it would be interesting to see how many people in here would have, in fact, ridden their bikes or taken public transit to this meeting, or to see how many people actually use transit system for all of their needs. Because if we were all using transit, that maybe would alleviate the need for additional parking places in residential areas. But we don't all use transit, so we do require parking spaces that relate to how many people per unit will be having vehicles. With the overflow parking issue at complexes with insufficient spaces, that negatively affects surrounding areas. The parking maintenance plan will hopefully resolve this overflow issue. On another point, is there a possibility of an enforceable code that vehicles would have to be moved after a certain length of time so that we wouldn't have vehicles, even though they're licensed, that have been on the streets without being moved for decades? In the regard to the reduction of age-restricted housing, at the last City Council meeting, there was recognition of opportunities that the City of Lakewood has for senior citizens. During that presentation, it was stated that the current number of seniors was significant, with a remarked increase every year.
Time's up.
Please keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Rick, Mike, Lenore, and Lori. And if you didn't sign up and you'd like to speak, please come and stop by the clerk and sign up.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. The presentation that you just saw has to do with parking changes recommended by the Development Dialogue Committee. And because I attend all of those meetings, I'd first of all like to thank Councilor Skilling and his committee for the hard work they did, along with Planning Commission and Travis and his group in the Planning Department, because they spent a lot of time on this and it's really necessary. The problem with it is unless we have the recommended parking management system in place, they're just going to be words on a piece of paper. We have neighborhoods in the city that are experiencing a lot of problems because we don't have enforcement. And we don't have enough police agents to do that. And I think we'd all agree that we don't want our police agents out there writing tickets. They have more important things to do. So there are some other parking regulations that we already have in place, things like not supposed to park 30 feet from a stop sign, 15 feet from a hydrant, 5 feet from a driveway. I can tell you right now that if you were to come down to my neighborhood where I live across the street from Red Rocks Church on any Sunday morning, if these regulations were held to, you'd be towing, no exaggeration, 100 to 200 cars every single Sunday. And we don't want that either. That's not what I'm advocating for. On page 19 of your packet, page 2 of the March 5th minutes from the Development Dialogue meeting, Director Travis Parker stated, "It is best practice for neighborhoods to request on-street parking permits for their own neighborhood." He stated that tickets and residential permit fees will pay for the cost of parking enforcement officers. He stated that these programs are revenue positive. So in other words, A traffic management system is going to pay for itself, and there's absolutely no good reason to not have it. Rules don't mean anything if we don't have a way to enforce it. And people are parking the way they're parking in the city right now because they know that there's very little chance that there's going to be any consequences for what they're doing. So the parking management system is absolutely necessary, or none of this stuff is going to work. And there's one last thing that citizens of Lakewood can do to help mitigate and reduce future parking problems in this city, and that is to take back some control on the overdevelopment that is running rampant all across our city. I strongly urge citizens of Lakewood to vote yes on question 200 in the upcoming special election. Thank you.
What does that have to do with the discussion tonight?
If you can talk about it when you're not supposed to, so can I.
Okay, well, we do have rules in chambers, and we have rules to public comment and public input, but you're always welcome to say what you want. I would just, to add richness to this conversation, this is to include you in our discussions, and so to keep it relevant really helps us. So I would encourage you to continue to do that. And again, you are welcome to say whatever you want in your 3 minutes, but it's much more helpful to be a part of the conversation. Mr. West? No, you didn't wish to speak? Okay. Thank you. Lenore, come on down. Good evening. Welcome.
My comments relate to CCU. Last
Grab
week,
the microphone.
Pardon?
Grab the microphone.
Last week,
There you go.
we had a forum with CCU, and it became very clear that they're not planning any time in the near future doing anything to help with building a parking structure or anything on their campus. So it's sort of up to us. So I have two suggestions. Number one, I know we gauge the number of parking spaces by square footage. For a university, this is not an effective way. As a matter of fact, it came out in this meeting that they're reducing the square footage in the dormitory while putting more students in there. So that would certainly skew parking spaces. My other suggestion is I'm also a big proponent of parking permits and would suggest that CCU foot the bill for that, since they don't pay taxes and the problem is created by them. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Lori? Come on down, you're batting cleanup. Your team is always very well organized.
You're so lucky, 2 weeks in a row. Lori Graves, Lakewood Estates Homeowners Association. I just want to make a brief comment about the fact that through this dialogue, they decided not to address the residential maximum limit of 7 vehicles. I still would strongly suggest that we take a look at that. You've just passed, I think, the R0 zoning, is that correct? No, but it's coming, we think.
Well,
maybe.
That'll be for a,
For a different thing. Anyway.
There'll be a formal council discussion on it.
It's relevant in terms of the size of a lot and how many cars you can get on a lot. It's relevant for R16, which is what we are, small lots. Code is you can use up to 50% of your lot for parking. HOAs then do restrictions, very limited frontage when you get into these small lots. So there has to be a different way to deal with the small lots. Side lots are 5 feet each side. The other zones are 10 feet each side. So I really think that that still needs to be addressed, and it's not. I'm not sure that the parking management plan is going to address that. So if we can do something there, and we have a parking management plan that works and isn't too costly, I still think the city needs to deal with existing parking problems, and there's no good way for neighbors to deal with neighbors. This thing gets really contentious. At a planning commission meeting, I suggested that the city set up a mediator process where neighbors could come, work with a mediator, and get some resolution so people don't have to move out of their house, like Charlie, to get some resolution. I think there are ways to deal with it. Involve a mediator association, see if you can get students who could do things pro bono, and bring neighbors together. It'll reduce tension in the neighborhood, should reduce police calls, should save on some resources. And you use a mediator now when you're dealing with the courts. I think it's an option to add to this so people have a place to go. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? All right, I'll close public input. I appreciate the participation. I will just say something. We do have opportunities with mediators that we've used in the past for neighbor disputes. Unfortunately, I would say 95% of the people, maybe 90% of the people get along and follow laws, and we have to deal with the 5 to 10% that don't. And, you know, so a lot of times you can work a lot of this out, but on those tough ones that we're here discussing, what they call wicked problems or wicked issues, they can be challenging. So if you are experiencing that currently, we do have the opportunity to do some mediation through Jefferson County. And unfortunately, in that area, that's been a 30-year-long venture with some folks. But to a lot of the comments about the regulation, the parking management plan, and really redefining how we deal with parking, that's what the goal is to come and where that'll come from. So stay tuned. Ms. Vincent, you wanted to maybe add a couple of things, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Skilling.
Do you want me to go ahead? Oh, okay, after that. Okay, I had already talked to several people about this, but I would like to see it increase to 1 parking space in the transit corridor, yeah. It's not working, and I realize that the parking management system may change some of that, but the 0.75, I get a lot of pushback, and I live right there, about what is somebody supposed to do with 3/4 of a car. So I would like to see that changed. Also, I could probably live, but I'd like some more information on it. Right now we have 1, 2, 3 just in the Two Creeks area, and I know there's one over in Ward 1 too that is, and we're about ready, I think, to get another one that's income restricted. So I'd like to see how much of that parking is really utilized. There may be an opportunity to increase the percentage of decrease. Does that work?
More of a range, maybe?
More of a range, thank you.
That's set
at 20%. It could vary. Also, and then the only other thing is the age restriction. I know that could vary. You have age restriction that is for, I guess what we would call healthy adults, just 55 plus. And then you have also age restricted, which is like assisted living, things such as that, which would probably require less parking than something that is what they call healthy adult, 55 plus. So those would be my only suggestions, and I appreciate you guys doing all this work. It was not easy at all. So thank you.
So the goal would be, once I think Mr. Skilling gets through kind of what he's going to go to, is let's give direction, if we can, tonight with the recommendations. We are missing 3 council members, 2 of who are on our Development Dialogue Committee, so we can maybe bring those forth as a menu as well, and could be voted on as amendments at the next. That way we just get consensus to move forward, and council doesn't have to decide tonight yes or no, and hopefully we'll have a full deck then. Mr. Skilling.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to address something we heard about the 7 cars, the maximum. One of the problems we saw is the goal is to try to remove cars from the street in some areas, and the problem with doing the maximum on a lot is then they would move their cars to the street. So if I say you can only have 2 cars on your lot, then there's going to be now 5 on the street, whereas before there would be 4. I think that point illustrates the importance, and I'll echo what the mayor had said, the parking management plan. One of the reasons that we got that to the main body so quickly is that the committee found that really does address a lot of the ills that we're hearing. All roads seem to lead back to a parking management plan. We can talk about ratios of parking and new developments, but bottom line is what the heart of the issue is, you have the neighborhoods that are dealing with consternation of added vehicles. Whether it's Mr. Olson talking about his neighborhood, we've heard Councilman Vincent talk about some of the neighborhoods in Ward 2, or whether it's some of the universities or some of the neighborhoods associated with that. Really, a lot of those issues are probably best served in either enforcing existing rules or with a residential permit program, a myriad of ideas that we expect to hear once we have that proposed plan in place. I think that it's important that now, with the recommendations that we have, to Councilor Vincent's point, there are some things that we can do to set the floor. One of those could be the ratios. Restaurant parking, we all heard, was a big issue in restaurants. And as Mr. Parker alluded to, one of the proposals is a quadrupling of the spaces that we have now. I do want to highlight on recommendation 1, we should discuss what those ratios, whether those are adequate. We as a committee did discuss that those would be the absolute floor. I think there was a lot of discussion whether or not those numbers were correct. And I'll reiterate, we're not going to get those numbers perfect. We don't know what the perfect number is in those areas. But I do think that the stopgap will be that parking management plan, that for those developments where maybe it was wrong, where there wasn't enough parking, we at least know that with a parking management plan that works, that the neighborhood will have protections in that regard. So keep that in mind, that we'll try our best on the ratios, but a lot of this, as everyone will say, it is somewhat trial and error. I think we've learned that these ratios may need to be adjusted. That's why we're here after the last rewrite making those adjustments. The only other thing that I would say is there was recommendation 2 on public comment. We heard about the director's discretion and whether or not the on-street parking can be used. I think, Mr. Parker, one thing on recommendation 2 is if there's a way to craft it to perhaps, and this is something to leave to the body, whether that on-street parking, whether that could preclude perhaps the neighborhood. So if you have the 4 sides of a development and we're going to allow them to use the on-street, would that be limited to the on-street that's directly adjacent to their building? And the point A in that says, shall be provided with every multi-family development. A and C would seem inconsistent in some respect if you were to allow them to use an adjacent neighborhood rather than the 4 sides. And maybe that's just some cleanup language between now and second reading that we can discuss as a body when we get to recommendation 2. Those are just some of the things I wanted to flag, just kind of overarching. And I don't, Mayor, do you want to just go recommendation by recommendation, start with recommendation 1? I think Councilor Vincent brings up some really good points, and Councilor Johnson and Councilor Abel certainly have more transit in their wards, obviously. And so I defer to absolutely what Councilor Vincent had said. If she's got 4 developments that they're seeing, I think that's something that this body should look at. Maybe do the 1.0 and then what we're going to do about that affordable housing piece, raising the 20 to 30%, and maybe we throw that back to planning and see what their opinion is. If we do 1.0, then what's the number on that affordable or the senior piece? Should we raise it then 20 to 30 and connect those 2 pieces?
So with that, I have a Christmas tree lit up here. So we'll get to everybody, but on that item 1, you heard that recommendation, and then the sliding scale with the, kind of what could a scale look like on the affordable and senior. Do folks want to speak to this, or is it okay to go forward with that recommendation that Councilor Vincent made? So if you want to speak to it, if you don't want to speak to it, please turn your lights off. Okay. Ms. Gutwein.
Thank you. I just have one question. Are we seeing the transit development actually building at 0.75, or I'm looking at some of the packet information from our meetings, and my understanding is that a lot of the banks are requiring, in order to get financing, higher. And so are we already typically building at 1? Do you know?
We are. The only one that we examined that was built at less than 1 was a senior live. It was the Cityscape at Belmar,
Okay.
and which is age restricted.
Great. Thank you.
Ms. Vincent?
I still want it at 1 though, even whatever they're building now, because if it's in there, that's what they'll build to, rather than we've already had people pushing back wanting the 0.75.
If it's already being done, I have no problem with
Putting it in there? Okay, thank you.
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. I absolutely appreciate that you brought this up, Sharon, and I couldn't support you more. And I'd like to bring up the apartment house over on Zephyr and 14th. When that was going up, I went over and asked the construction man, because it's multifamily. It's in the shape like this, 3-sided. And I said to him, because it's, I think, 3 stories, it's 4 families. And I asked him, where are the children going to play? And he looked at me and he says, well, we've got a pool table between 2 of the buildings, because they use the interior, the courtyard, for parking, and then they've got parking on the street, but they also have parking on the north side of 14th. So they are using up a lot of parking over there. I couldn't support you more. Thank you. And going along with that, someplace in the document it's saying to have 1 parking place, 1 for visitors, for multi. You know, when you're looking at some of these large buildings, that to me just doesn't even make sense. When you've got so many apartment houses, you know, you have your family over, and that might be 3 or 4 cars right there.
So I think that's further down, so we can get back to the visitor parking. Mr. Abel?
Thank you. I appreciate what's being said about the mix of older folks and affordable units. Do we have hard data on that, or is this just assumptions? I mean, I have 3 vehicles. I have not seen, except for, as Ms. Vincent said, the care facilities or the larger complexes of senior care residents. I would like to see some hard facts and figures to show that there are fewer vehicles with both groups before we go into that.
Yeah, we have provided that data to the development committee, and we'll provide it to you all as a group as well.
Okay, so on number 1, the recommendation would be to move forward with the increase of 1, and then you're gonna take a look at a sliding scale potentially that could be offered on the affordable and the senior that council could discuss further. Is that good? Okay.
That's on item.
Okay.
That's item 4. So item 4 and 1 would be voted.
10-4. We'll just be redundant. Item 2 is you. Please.
So item 2, as was stated in the presentation, the main difference that we had between the committee's recommendations and planning commissions was that in the transit context, we were lowering that to the 20 units. So to Councilor Vincent's point, again, in transit, you'd have the 1 visitor space for every 30 units, or for one for every 20. I would recommend that we just go with the 20 when it comes back for second reading. I don't think there's a reason to bracket that. If there's consensus on the 20, and then the other points that we had there was just what I had mentioned in my when I was prefacing this conversation. We had the what to do about the visitor spaces as far as the on-street parking adjacent neighborhoods. And so I don't think you've had a chance to respond to that, but certainly it would seem that if there was discretion to allow them to say, hey, look, there's a neighborhood that can hold all the cars, that would seem to be antithetical to what we're trying to do here. So,
and I should have said much earlier, the way that we use that now is to get new on-street parking built. So when developers come like on 13th Avenue and they build new on-street parking, we allow them to count that towards their parking requirement. Does that make sense? So this is intended for new on-street parking.
So I think what it would need to be, I think we would need, I would ask for consensus that on C or even on A, that we make it clearer that it will not be that exactly to the point you just said, which is it's almost if you change the word with to within on A might help, because it says it shall be provided with every multi-family development, which is to your point, that's a new build that we're requiring them to provide new on-street parking. So maybe if we just clarify that when it comes back to second reading, that it's clear that if it's going to be on-street parking, this is new and not existing neighborhoods, adjacent neighborhoods.
Mr. Abel?
If I remember right, what you're talking about is having the developer make an inset in the frontage, not putting in new on-street parking, but putting a little rectangular area where people can pull in and be off the street, but still on pavement next to a curb. It's not putting them right next to the curb.
Correct. They're extending the curb out and making the road wider.
Okay. Also wanted to just remind folks that weren't in the Development Dialogue Committee meetings that when you park people on the street in Lakewood, you're generally parking them in bicycle lanes or where kids walk on the way to school in many places. So we have to be very vigilant about where we allow that. Thank you.
So, Mr. Skilling, I would echo, I'm certainly okay with the 20. So if we do get consensus, we can drop that down to 20, which is just 10 off from the Planning Commission recommendation. And then an example of that on-street parking, you did hear Zephyr referenced earlier, and that is what counted for them was that cutout. So to Mr. Abel's point, it's not taking up street right-of-way, is actually cut into their property to allow the on-street.
It generally is in the right-of-way, but it's new pavement.
New pavement.
Yeah.
But not, yep, we're on the same page. Ms. Johnson?
Regarding Zephyr, they're still parking across the street though, so.
Yes, but those didn't count. They don't get to count those towards their parking requirement. Does that make sense?
Right, I'm saying that they're parking on the street all over the place, really. Okay. I don't know if there's any appetite for this, but I would even consider if we took the amount of visitor spaces down from 1 per 20, from 1 to 15 perhaps. When you've got these large multifamily units, you've got people coming and going, their friends are coming and going, their family, and I think that would be reasonable as well.
So we can certainly, if there's consensus to add that, we can throw that on, and then we could go 15 and 20 if you'd like to have that opportunity. Again, there's two of our folks missing, Councilor Bita, Councilor LeBeer from the, yeah. So there's a recommendation to bring both options forward of 15 and 20. Mr. Parker, I'm just curious, how do you, right? I mean, nothing is perfect when you try to calculate these sort of things. And so based upon where we are now to what these proposals would be a substantial increase potentially in some of the visitor, but is there a formula that's used, or does every development do it different, or is it based on who they're marketing it to?
The visitor is sort of new. We don't have a visitor parking requirement right now. So right now, the number of spaces they have, they could assign however they want. And so this is something new that we don't have a lot of data on.
Okay. So does council want to move 15 and 20 forward?
I do.
Okay. All right. So we'll move 15 and 20 forward.
I don't quite understand.
So basically matching the two contexts. So the planning commission recommendation was 30. We dropped it to 20.
Okay.
And then also present an option for 15.
And all that's within the transit. So we'll have an option for 15, an option for 20 within the transit. Okay.
Yeah. Anything else on 2? All right. Next. Three.
So I had nothing. I mean, the committee is. We did talk a lot about the restaurant issues. We have certain examples that we drew from when looking at examples of what we want to avoid perhaps in the future. Other than that, as I stated before, this is a quadruple, a triple, and a double. So again, I think this is a substantial increase. The committee did go over this, and I think we've adopted planning commission's recommendations as well. So there was consensus on that.
So I had one question, and that is how you kind of arrived. So the ratio on urban, do you have that slide up? No slides up. Nothing. So you went, I'm just curious, how did you get to 6? Really, that's all my question is.
For urban?
Yeah.
So we did look at a number of restaurants, both ones built prior to 2012 when there was a much higher minimum, and ones that were built post 2012. 6 was, other than the Abruzzi's in Northwest Lakewood, 6 was the lowest number that was out there for any restaurants that, and we hadn't identified any other restaurants that had parking issues, that had overflow. Okay. And so 6 was that number that represented the lowest successful parking situation.
Yeah, because I was curious, transit is pretty close to the urban, number, and so you went 2 up from the transit. So I was just curious how that came to be. So I mean, I'm certainly fine moving all of it forward. Mr. Abel.
Just to clarify, there was some question about who chooses which number of spaces from that range. Is it the applicant or is it the planning department? The applicant gets to decide how many spaces.
Yes, every use has a minimum and a maximum, and we enforce the minimum and maximum, but within that range, it's at the discretion of the development.
I understand, and hopefully most of them will take a long community view at that, but I still have concerns that some folks are going to go for the very least possible. And we'll discuss that, I guess, at public hearing.
Ms. Franks.
Thanks, Mayor Paul. Since I'm not on the Development Dialogue Committee and they produce a lot of information to get through, I may have missed it somewhere, but is transit like within X amount of feet of it? I mean, I guess when someone's coming, are they put into a bucket, or what's the criteria? So if they're transit, is it within X amount of feet of a light rail station? Is that what determines their designation?
No, we actually have it coded into the zoning. So each property that's zoned mixed use, the last digit is in an S, a U, or a T. And those T's are mapped around the light rail station.
I got it. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. At the time that Abruzzi's was built, the standard for restaurants was 5 to 12 parking places per 1,000 square footage of the restaurant. And it sounds like Abruzzi's was the one that decided to go with the 5. So they've got 25 parking places per 5,000 square footage of their restaurant. Frankly, even if they'd gone to 12, I don't know if it would have been adequate. And what happened in Abruzzi's is a real lesson for all of us, a terrible lesson. There's still ramifications in that neighborhood. Prior to the 2012 rewrite, what was the standards for restaurants? Do you happen to know, Travis?
I don't. I have the counts of a number of restaurants that were built, and a lot of them are 10 and 12 per, but I don't have that minimum in front of me.
Okay. Perhaps at some point we could find what that is. Thank you.
Okay, anything else pertaining to number 3? We're good to go forward with 3? Council? Yes? Okay, thank you. 4?
So 4 links back to Councilor Vincent's original suggestion. This is the sliding scale, Mayor, that you referred to earlier. So this we should link with recommendation 1, whatever that's going to be. I heard talk tonight of 20% to 30%. Is that, it seems like that's the way it would slide, but I suppose when it comes back on second reading, it would just say 20%. If you want to amend it upwards, then you would do that, I suppose.
So we're okay. Is that clear?
And I should be clear, all of the things that you're recommending, we'll bring you as options. We're going to bring you the text that was forwarded by the Planning Commission and the Dialogue Committee, and we will identify the proposed amendments as amendments that the council will make. So the transit from 7.5 to 1, council will have to make that amendment. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, let me just clarify. I mean, is that what are we going to come back and it's going to say 1? Because isn't the point of tonight we're getting consensus on some items. We've only had it, I think, on the increasing the transit to 1. And then we did have 1 bracket
15 and 20.
on 15 to 20. But I think when it comes back to us on the second reading, it probably should just say 1 on the transit.
Okay, so I can certainly do that. The way that we've done it on the previous 2 development dialogues is we brought you the Planning Commission language, and then you amended them based on your consensus from the study session.
Okay, that's fine. As long as we're clear on it. I mean, I'm trying to learn from each of these. Sure. And so I want to make sure that the language, and that's fine. As long as what we're saying tonight on the consensus is somehow reflected, so that we're not reinventing everything again and rehashing everything again, and then at 3 a.m. we're adopting things. So
we're learning too. So in the last one, we brought you a page of consensus-derived amendments.
Okay,
that you could then make.
There you go. Good.
Councilor Johnson, you want to speak to number 4?
Yes, I do. Okay. Thank you. We've got up to 20% reduction where the residents are 55 or older. Generally, at 55, people do not give up their cars, number 1. Number 2, if they are in an age-restricted type facility, maybe assisted living, there's employees to consider as well. And also you've got vendors like oxygen coming, visiting nurse, occupational therapy. So I think we need to be very cognizant of what we're doing, even if it's age restricted. All righty.
Thank you. So the consensus was to look at a range of 20 to 30. Is that good for council to move that forward? Okay. Looking to my left. Yep. Thank you. Item 5.
The remainder of the items, including item 5, I don't have any comment on other than what's in the packet. We had some folks can read the minutes. We did have some fun dialogue when it comes to things like bicycle parking and EV charging and those types of things, but I don't think it's anything that I certainly won't be opining on tonight. So 5 through the remainder, I think through 10, I'm good with the language that's in there.
I echo that. Any questions on 5 through 10? And then a reiteration that 11 has to do with the parking management plan, which we'll be hearing about more as we go down the road. Ms. Franks?
Yeah, I just wanted to share a couple things about the parking management plan. Certainly excited to see that move forward. Would want us to make sure that we kind of understand impact of group homes kind of to that management plan because, you know, again, the number of rooms. The comment earlier, she worded it much better than I will, but that kind of street storage and rotation sort of cycle on that. And then on the maximum of 7 cars, the issue with that is some can be behind the fence and front. So I think we really need to understand what we're doing there, so we don't push vehicles to the street. So those are just the 3 things I kind of wanted to make sure get some attention in that plan.
Mr. Abel?
Just a couple of, I'm sorry, a couple of points in the minutes. It reflects that we asked for a number of, for information on a number of points with comparative data to other cities. And we don't have that, so can you draw those comparisons during the public hearing?
We can. I'll review the minutes and we'll bring you whatever was that.
Thank you very much. And I think a point was made about smaller parcels. Would the 7 vehicles fit into this or the traffic management plan?
So,
I mean,
yeah,
I believe now if you have 7 vehicles on your property, they all have to be on an improved surface of some sort.
Yeah, correct.
But some things that might be coming up in the future, and indeed some of the smaller lots that exist today, that would be paving over the whole yard and side yard, and some of them still probably couldn't hold 7 vehicles. So how should we address that? Any suggestions, Mr. Parker?
Well, so that would be self-regulating on those smaller lots. I mean, you can only pave up to your open space limitation on those lots. So if you've got a very small lot, you've got a very small pavable area, and so you'd just be self-regulated below 7, and other standards would kick in.
Okay. In those cases, it would be pushing vehicles to the street on very small frontages as well. So if somebody comes up and says, I have a right to 7 cars on my lot, I'm going to park one on the porch, what are we going to do about that?
Code enforcement will spend some time with them.
If we hire some more code enforcement officers who have the time. Thank you. I would like to address that, though.
So we don't have consensus on that. You don't mean, you're right. You mean going forward, right? Certainly, yes, certainly that needs to be almost bucketed. So this is a good opportunity for council. Anything that you think of that might need to be part of the parking management plan, whether it's group homes, small lot, 7 cars, 5 cars, keep that in mind. And that will be prime for that next conversation. So the consensus on the remaining items to go forward, are we cool? All right. Mr. Parker, do you need any clarification?
I think I've got it. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you to our committee members and to council and to the community for weighing in. Point of clarification, I did not see, and maybe I missed it, when will this have its hearing? It's not calendared yet. Okay. I don't see it through July, so.
Do you have this one?
Unless this isn't vehicle and traffic micromobility. That's, is that what you call it now? What?
Public Works.
Micro machines.
Creative terminology.
Yeah. Mr. Goldstein?
it's not calendared at this time, but it looks like we might have some availability in August.
Okay. All right.
Maybe before then, but we do have some busy meetings coming up.
Yep. Okay.
I'm available this week. Special meeting.
Okay. All right. So we will go into reports. I'll start with Mr. Roybal.
No report.
Ms. Gutwein.
No report.
Mr. Skilling, nothing. Mr. Abel.
I went to 4 graduation ceremonies this week, all of them unique, all of them very moving and touching, and the job we're doing educating our kids is remarkable. Not us, the school district, pardon me.
Ms. Franks, Ms. Johnson.
Yes, I do. And actually, Charlie and I went to Lakewood High graduation, and kudos to Principal Bach. After the Star Spangled Banner, the kids were cheering and happy. That was really nice to see. Also, he recognized the graduates who are going into the military, and then had the current and former servicemen stand. Kudos to him. I thought that was neat. But on a more cranky note, this last week I got what's called a push poll. And for those of you that don't know what the terminology push poll means, it would be like if I were to tell you, or somebody in a push poll told you, did you know that Ramey ties her husband to the washing machine to make him do the laundry and to fold it? Would you still like her? That's a push poll. It was conducted by Campaign Solutions Group, and it was basically on the Strategic Growth Initiative. You know, the reality is I don't care how people vote on it, but it's very disappointing when either side takes this tactic. And I hope that as we go forward, that people will be more careful about the type of information that they put out there. And I do not tie Walt to the washing machine.
Ms. Vincent?
Yes, I just want to remind everybody, and I will mention it because things have changed, that we, on June 12th, which is Wednesday from 6 to 7:30, Ward 2 will be having their meeting at the Clements Center. We're changing the location because since we moved to the evenings, we're getting more people there. So that's where it'll be.
Okay. So a few things I want to just mention to council while the packet's not out. The June 10th agenda will be packed. So as you prepare, if you have questions for staff, please take advantage. In the packet, you'll see appropriate staff, get those questions answered. We want to make sure that we have productive and timely meetings. Councilor Johnson and I had the opportunity to attend the Elks 70th anniversary, which is always a fantastic opportunity at the Lodge 1777, and they do an incredible amount of good work for our veterans, for our youth, and they've really stepped up in trying to help our homeless population and offering their building as a warming site during severe sheltering nights. So the 150th anniversary of the Elks and the 70th of our Lakewood Lodge, and they are always asking and open for new members. So if you're interested, please do that. Sounds like the marathon went well. And like to echo what Mr. Abel said, a lot of graduations going on. Congratulations to all of our graduates. Super proud of them. I had the chance to go to Belmar Elementary this week. They have a new art integration program. So they've actually changed the name, but they have a brand new mural outside, which is fantastic. And then I went to Brady today. If you've never heard of Brady Exploration, it's a really cool program that offers a wide range of things for kids who are not traditionally bound or may not have a home or are struggling in many different ways. So what a neat experience to see what goes on there. They're actually open all summer, so it gives a safe place for those somewhat at-risk kids to go and have some adult supervision as well as some food, so food bank. But what they did say is when winter comes, if it ever ends, they do need jackets, scarves, gloves, things like that. So let's keep that in mind. I know we do a lot for different areas, but they said that is one need. I'd like to congratulate our council member who's not here. Congratulate Mr. and Mrs. LeBeer. Councilor LeBeer was married on Saturday night to Haley, and so we wish them the best. I hope they're enjoying their honeymoon. And then lastly, I would just reiterate, public comment is always welcome. If you want to come and talk about whatever subject you want, the second and fourth Mondays are your nights. And I just echo that we'd like to keep tonight's comments at study sessions towards the topics at hand. Ms. Greer? Mr. Parker, Mr. Graham? Mr. Goldstein, you did a great job. Thank you. And thank you to our police agent for being here tonight. And we will adjourn at 8:45.